A glittering gala, a janitor in a cheap suit, a cruel laugh from the boss. Then doors slam, guns rise, people scream. And the quiet single dad moves like he's done this before. Calm, precise, unstoppable. In one heartbeat, he becomes someone else, and the whole room knows it. Who is this man they mocked? Why does the fear in those gunmen look like recognition? Whispers spread. Someone wanted him exposed. As the night spirals, a darker truth creeps in his hidden past, a target on his back, and a little girl who calls him Dad now in danger. With time running out and the city watching, he must choose. Keep hiding, or fight for everything he loves. When the past kicks down the door, what will he risk to save his daughter, and will the truth save them or destroy them? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Thomas Lane pushed his cleaning cart down the quiet hallway of Mero Industries' gleaming headquarters. The evening sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting golden stripes across the polished marble floors he'd just finished mopping. Most employees had gone home for the day, leaving behind only the hum of the ventilation system and the squeak of his cart's wheels. He paused, at the sound of sniffling coming from around the corner. Setting aside his cleaning supplies, Thomas followed the sound until he found a small girl, no older than 6, huddled against the wall near the building's daycare center. Her pink backpack was clutched tightly to her chest, and tears streaked her cheeks. "Hey there," Thomas said softly, crouching down to her level. "Are you lost?" The little girl nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I can't find my mommy." "That must be scary," Thomas said, his voice gentle. "My name's Thomas. What's yours?" "Sarah," she whispered. "Well, Sarah, I bet your mom's looking for you too. The daycare center's right over there. Would you like me to help you find her?" Sarah nodded again, and Thomas offered his hand. As they walked toward the daycare, he talked quietly about his own daughter, Ellie, and how she used to love drawing pictures during her time at daycare. Sarah's grip on his hand gradually relaxed. Just then, a worried voice called out, "Sarah? Sarah?" A woman in a business suit rushed around the corner, relief flooding her face when she saw her daughter. "Mommy!" Sarah ran to her mother, who scooped her up in a tight embrace. "Oh, sweetie, I was so worried. I got caught up in a meeting, and when I came to pick you up," she looked up at Thomas gratefully. "Thank you so much for helping her." "It's no trouble at all, ma'am," Thomas replied, with a humble smile. "Wait," called another voice. A young woman in professional attire emerged from the HR office nearby, having witnessed the scene. "Sir, you're Thomas Lane, right? The evening janitor?" Thomas nodded, already reaching for his cart. "Yes, ma'am. I should get back to—" "That was really kind of you," she said, her expression warm. "I've seen you around, always helping people, opening doors when someone's arms are full, staying late to clean up coffee spills before they stain." She paused, thinking. "You know, the company's annual charity gala is coming up this weekend. We always reserve a few spots to recognize outstanding community service." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Oh, that's not necessary. I'm going to put your name forward," she decided, already pulling out her tablet. "We need more people like you at these events. People who actually care about others." Before Thomas could protest further, Sarah's mother joined in. "That's a wonderful idea. You absolutely should attend." The next morning, Thomas sat at his small kitchen table, staring at the cream-colored envelope that had just arrived. The Mero Industries logo gleamed in gold leaf on the heavy paper. Inside was a formal invitation to the charity gala, complete with a handwritten note praising his dedication to community service. "What's that, Dad?" Ellie bounded into the kitchen, her school backpack slung over one shoulder. Her curious eyes fell on the fancy envelope. "Nothing important, sweetheart. Just a work thing." Thomas tried to slide the invitation away, but Ellie was too quick. "A gala?" Her eyes lit up as she read the invitation. "Dad, that's like a fancy party. You have to go." Thomas ran a hand through his graying hair. "I don't think so, Elle. Those events, they're not really for people like me." "What do you mean, people like you?" Ellie put her hands on her hips, looking so much like her mother that it made Thomas's heart ache. "You're the best person I know. I don't even have anything to wear," Thomas said softly, thinking of his worn work uniforms and casual clothes. Ellie's face brightened. "Yes, you do. What about that suit we got at the thrift store for Uncle Mike's wedding?" Thomas winced, remembering the slightly too tight jacket and the pants that were just a bit too short. "Honey, that's not really." "Please, Dad?" Ellie clasped her hands together. "You're always telling me to be brave and try new things. Remember when I was scared to join the art club?" Thomas couldn't help but smile. "That's different." "No, it's not," Ellie insisted. She picked up the invitation, running her fingers over the embossed lettering. "They invited you because you're kind and helpful. That's way more important than having fancy clothes." Thomas looked at his daughter's earnest face, seeing the same unwavering faith she'd always had in him, even during their hardest times after her mother passed. He thought about all the times he'd encouraged her to be confident, to not let fear hold her back. "You're right," he said finally, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Sometimes Dad needs reminding of his own advice." Ellie beamed. "So you'll go?" Thomas nodded, already wondering if he could press the old suit without burning it. "I'll go." "Yes?" Ellie threw her arms around him. "You'll be the best-dressed person there, Dad, because you'll be wearing your kind heart." Thomas hugged her back, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. Maybe the suit wasn't perfect, and maybe he'd feel out of place among all those executives and their designer clothes. But Ellie was right. Some things were more important than appearances. Thomas Lane stood before the massive glass doors of the Grand Plaza Hotel, tugging at the collar of his second-hand suit. The fabric felt stiff and tight across his shoulders, and the pants were a bit too short, revealing his worn dress socks when he walked. He'd done his best to steam out the wrinkles, but some stubbornly remained, like permanent reminders that he didn't belong here. "You look great, Dad," Ellie whispered beside him, squeezing his hand. Her eyes sparkled with pride as she looked up at him in her simple blue dress, a bargain find from the clearance rack at Target. "Thanks, sweetheart." Thomas managed to smile, grateful for her presence. "Remember, we don't have to stay long." They joined the stream of guests flowing into the hotel's grand ballroom. The contrast was immediate and stark. Designer gowns swept across marble floors. Diamond necklaces caught the light of crystal chandeliers. The air itself seemed expensive, perfumed with success and privilege. A hostess in a black cocktail dress consulted her tablet. "Mr. Lane?" Her professional smile flickered slightly as she took in his appearance. "You're at table 23. Near the—" She hesitated. "Near the kitchen service entrance." Thomas nodded politely, pretending not to notice her discomfort. He guided Ellie through the crowd, feeling the weight of curious stares. Whispers followed in their wake. "Isn't that the janitor? Who invited him? Did you see that suit?" Table 23 was exactly what he'd expected. A remote corner where the kitchen staff bustled in and out with plates and glasses. The table's other occupants were all junior staff members, looking nearly as uncomfortable as Thomas felt. "Would you like some lemonade?" he asked Ellie, desperate for something to do with his hands. She nodded, but before Thomas could stand, a waiter appeared with a tray of champagne flutes. The server's eyes darted between Thomas and the expensive champagne, clearly unsure if he should offer. "Just water for me," Thomas said quietly. "And lemonade for my daughter if you have it." The elegant ballroom continued to fill with Minneapolis's elite. Corporate executives in tailored tuxedos, society wives dripping in jewelry, young entrepreneurs in designer suits that probably cost more than Thomas's monthly rent. They all seemed to move with an easy confidence, as if they'd been born knowing which fork to use first. The lights dimmed slightly, and a spotlight illuminated the stage. Griffin Merrow, CEO of Merrow Industries, stepped up to the podium. His custom-made tuxedo fit him perfectly, his silver hair styled just so, his smile practiced and gleaming. He was the picture of corporate success, everything Thomas wasn't. "Welcome, everyone, to our annual charity gala," Merrow began, his voice smooth and cultured. "I'm delighted to see so many familiar faces here tonight." And a few. His gaze found Thomas in the corner, lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. Unexpected ones. The crowd tittered. Thomas felt Ellie's hand slip into his under the table. You know, we pride ourselves on maintaining certain standards at Marrow Industries. Marrow continued, playfully adjusting his bow tie. Although, apparently our security team is getting a bit lenient with the dress code these days. More laughter rippled through the room. Several people turned to stare openly at Thomas now, some hiding smirks behind their hands or champagne glasses. I mean, really, who knew Goodwill was doing formal wear now? The joke landed hard, drawing full-throated laughs from the crowd. Thomas felt his face grow warm, but he kept his expression neutral, even managing a small nod of acknowledgement. He'd endured far worse than this in his life. But then he felt Ellie's hand trembling in his, and his heart ached. She shouldn't have to watch her father being humiliated for sport. He gave her fingers a gentle squeeze, trying to convey that it was okay, that words couldn't hurt him. Griffin Marrow was already moving on to other topics, fundraising goals and corporate achievements. But the damage was done. The other people at table 23 studied their plates intently, not daring to meet Thomas's eyes. A few tables over, someone was still chuckling about the Goodwill comment. Thomas sat straight in his chair, his dignity intact if not his pride. He'd learned long ago that true strength wasn't about fighting back. It was about standing firm in who you were, regardless of what others thought. Still, he couldn't help but notice how his suit sleeve was fraying slightly at the cuff, or how his tie was just a shade too wide to be currently fashionable. Ellie leaned close to whisper, "Can we go home soon, Dad?" He wanted to say yes. Every fiber of his being wanted to escape this gilded cage of judgment and pretense. But running away would only prove Marrow right, prove that people like Thomas didn't belong in places like this. So instead he whispered back, "We'll stay for dinner, sweetheart. Sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing." She nodded, understanding beyond her years. They sat together in their corner by the kitchen, the janitor and his daughter, enduring the sideways glances and barely concealed smirks with quiet dignity as Griffin Marrow's voice continued to fill the ballroom with self-importance. The glittering ballroom buzzed with polite conversation and tinkling champagne glasses. Thomas sat quietly at his corner table, nursing a glass of lemonade while watching Ellie chat excitedly with the caterer's daughter near the dessert table. At least someone was having a good time. And now, the event coordinator's voice rang out through the microphone. "Please welcome Mr. and Mrs. Harrison Blackwood, generous supporters of our children's literacy program." An elegantly dressed couple stepped into the spotlight, waving to polite applause. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the worn fabric of his suit making a slight scratching sound against the expensive seat cushion. The double doors at the main entrance suddenly burst open with a crash. 3 men in black tactical gear stormed in, automatic weapons raised. "Nobody move!" Screams erupted throughout the ballroom. Crystal glasses shattered against the marble floor as guests dropped everything in panic. Thomas watched as 2 of the men quickly moved to secure the exits, while the third kept his weapon trained on the crowd. "Everyone on the ground! Now!" The leader's voice boomed through the space. "Phones in the center of the room! Do it!" Thomas remained perfectly still, his eyes calmly scanning the room. He spotted Ellie behind a dessert cart and gave her a subtle hand signal, one they'd practiced at home as a game, but one that now carried deadly serious meaning. Stay hidden. Stay quiet. Griffin Marrow, who had been so smug just moments before, was now crouched behind an overturned table, his face pale with fear. Other guests scrambled to comply with the gunman's demands, sliding their phones across the floor with trembling hands. "I said everyone." One of the gunmen noticed Thomas still sitting. He stormed over, weapon raised. Thomas stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Sir," he said in an even voice that carried across the now silent room, "there are children present. Perhaps we could—" "Shut up and get down!" The man jabbed his weapon toward Thomas's chest. In that instant, Thomas moved. His hand shot out with shocking speed, grabbing the barrel of the gun while simultaneously stepping to the side. With one fluid motion, he twisted the weapon free and dropped the gunman with a precise strike to the knee. The other guests gasped. The remaining attackers swung their weapons toward him, but Thomas was already moving. "Everyone behind the columns!" he called out in a commanding voice. "Stay low, move quickly." People instinctively obeyed, scrambling for cover as Thomas advanced on the second gunman. His movements were precise, economical, nothing like a janitor, everything like someone with extensive combat training. The second attacker fired, but Thomas had already anticipated it, rolling behind a table. In one smooth motion, he flipped the heavy table onto its side, providing cover for a group of terrified guests. "What the hell?" Griffin Marrow whispered from behind his hiding spot, watching with wide eyes as his previously mocked janitor moved like a trained operative. Thomas emerged from behind the table, closing the distance to the second gunman with calculated steps. The attacker's shots went wide as Thomas grabbed his wrist, twisted sharply, and took him down with a series of precise strikes. The third gunman, seeing his companions disabled, backed toward the exit. His eyes locked onto Thomas with sudden recognition. "It can't be," he snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You're supposed to be dead, Commander." Thomas kept his body between the gunman and the civilians, his stance ready. But before he could move, the attacker turned and fled through the service entrance, leaving his companions groaning on the floor. The ballroom fell into stunned silence. Guests slowly emerged from their hiding places, staring at Thomas with a mixture of fear and awe. Griffin Marrow stood up from behind his table, his earlier mockery replaced by shocked disbelief. Thomas quickly secured the dropped weapons, his movements practiced and efficient. He checked the restraints on the subdued attackers before moving to the dessert cart where Ellie remained hidden. "Clear," he said softly, and she emerged, throwing herself into his arms. He held her close, his calm exterior finally cracking as he pressed a kiss to the top of her head. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Thomas stood, still holding Ellie's hand, as dozens of eyes fixed on him with burning questions. The same thought seemed to echo through everyone's mind. Who was this man really, this janitor in a cheap suit who had just saved their lives? Red and blue lights flashed through the tall ballroom windows as police cars surrounded the building. Officers in tactical gear streamed through the main entrance, weapons raised, only to find the situation already under control. Two unconscious gunmen lay face down on the marble floor, their wrists secured behind their backs with zip ties from the maintenance closet. Thomas stayed in the background, keeping close to the wall as he watched the officers process the scene. His hands were steady, but his heart raced. Years of training had kicked in without hesitation, but now the familiar post-action tremors threatened to surface. He needed to get out. Fast. "Daddy!" Ellie broke free from the group of evacuating guests and ran to him. He caught her in his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," he whispered, smoothing her hair. "Are you?" She nodded against his shoulder. "That was scary. But you were so brave." A detective approached them, notebook in hand. "Sir, we'll need a statement." "Of course," Thomas cut in smoothly. "But first, I need to get my daughter home. It's been a traumatic evening." The detective glanced at Ellie and nodded understanding. "First thing tomorrow, then. We'll need a full account of what happened here." Across the room, Griffin Marrow was holding court with a cluster of reporters who had somehow already arrived. His voice carried clearly across the chaos. "Completely unacceptable breach of security. Rest assured, there will be a full investigation into how these criminals accessed our event. The safety of our guests is paramount." Thomas guided Ellie toward the exit, keeping his head down. But Griffin's sharp eyes caught the movement, and his practiced smile took on an edge. "Ah, and there goes our mysterious hero of the evening," Griffin called out, his voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. "The janitor who apparently moonlights as Jason Bourne. Tell us, Mr. Lane, where exactly does a maintenance worker learn military-grade combat skills?" The reporters swung their cameras toward Thomas. Flashbulbs popped. Thomas turned slightly, keeping Ellie shielded behind him. "Just lucky timing," he said quietly. "Now, if you'll excuse us—" "Lucky?" Griffin's laugh was cold. "I don't believe in luck, especially not when it comes to my company's security. Who are you really?" More cameras. More questions shouted over each other. Thomas felt exposed, raw, like a nerve ending shocked back to life after years of careful numbness. He needed to get out. Now. "Mr. Lane, how did you disarm the gunman? Were you military? Who were they targeting?" "The attacker called you commander." "What did he mean?" Thomas pushed through the crowd, guiding Ellie toward the emergency exit. His threadbare suit jacket felt suffocating now, his collar too tight. The carefully constructed walls of his new life were crumbling, and he could feel the old world reaching through the cracks. They burst out into the cool night air. Thomas led Ellie quickly down the side street, away from the commotion at the main entrance. His old instincts were screaming now. Multiple escape routes, identify surveillance, check for tails. Thomas. He froze. That voice. He hadn't heard it in 5 years, but he would know it anywhere. A woman stepped out of the shadows between two parked cars. Her dark blazer and slacks could have belonged to any business professional, but Thomas recognized the subtle bulge of a shoulder holster beneath the jacket. Marla Jennings hadn't changed much. Still razor-sharp eyes. Still that precise way of moving that marked her as former intelligence. "Daddy?" Ellie gripped his hand tighter. "Who is she?" "An old friend," Thomas said carefully. "Ellie, wait by that bench for a moment, okay? Stay where I can see you." Once Ellie was out of earshot, Marla stepped closer. "You've done well, staying hidden this long. But tonight changed everything." "I had no choice," Thomas said. "Those men were Corsetti's people." Marla's voice was grim. "The same organization you helped dismantle in Belgrade. They've rebuilt, and now they know you're alive." Thomas felt the world tilt sideways. "That's impossible. The entire cell was eliminated." "Apparently not." Marla glanced at Ellie, then back to Thomas. "You'll need to come in. Both of you. We can protect." "No?" Thomas's voice was steel. "I left that life behind for a reason. They won't give you a choice." Marla said softly. "Your cover is blown. Every news outlet in the city will be running the story by morning. Hero janitor saves Gala. Your face will be everywhere." Thomas looked at Ellie, sitting patiently on the bench, swinging her legs. His whole world narrowed to her small figure, illuminated by the streetlight. Everything he'd done disappearing, building this quiet life had been to keep her safe, to give her normal. "I can't," he whispered. "Not again. She's already lost her mother. I won't drag her into that darkness." "The darkness just found you anyway," Marla countered. She pressed a burner phone into his hand. "Call me when you're ready. But don't wait too long. They know you're alive, Thomas, and they'll come for what's theirs." She melted back into the shadows, leaving Thomas standing there with the weight of his past pressing down on his shoulders. Ellie looked up as he returned to the bench. "Can we go home now, Daddy?" Thomas forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's go home." But as they walked to the car, he couldn't shake the feeling that home had just become as fragile as his carefully constructed new identity. The past was awake now, and it was hungry. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of Joe's Corner Diner, casting long shadows across the cracked vinyl booths. Thomas sat with his back to the wall, a habit he'd never shed, his untouched coffee growing cold. Across from him, Marla Jennings stirred her tea with practiced patience, her sharp eyes never leaving his face. "You look good for a dead man," she said finally, her voice low enough that the few early morning customers couldn't hear. "The janitor act suits you better than I expected." Thomas's fingers tightened around his coffee mug. "It's not an act anymore, Marla." "No, I suppose it isn't." She pushed a manila folder across the table. But neither was this. Inside were photos, mission reports, commendations, fragments of a life Thomas had buried 5 years ago. He didn't need to look at them. Every detail was seared into his memory. "Commander Thomas Lane," Marla recited softly. "Special Operations Command, Hostage Recovery and Intervention Unit. 27 successful extractions. 8 dismantled trafficking networks. The ghost who brought down the Karakov syndicate." She paused. "Until he became a ghost himself." The diner's bell chimed as a truck driver walked in. Thomas watched him take a seat at the counter before speaking. "That man died in Belgrade." "Did he?" Marla leaned forward. "Or did he just trade his tactical gear for a mop and bucket?" The memories came rushing back, unbidden and sharp as broken glass. The underground chamber in Serbia, the smell of cordite and fear. Children huddled in corners, while his team moved through the darkness with practiced precision. The satisfaction of watching Anton Karakov, the syndicate's leader, in handcuffs. Then came the other memories. Sarah's funeral on a rainy Tuesday, Ellie's tiny hand in his as they lowered the casket, the revelation that Sarah's accident hadn't been random, that his enemies had found his weakness. After Sarah, Thomas said, his voice rough, I couldn't risk it. Couldn't risk Ellie becoming a target. So I made a choice. You staged your own death, Marla finished. The explosion in Belgrade. The body we could never quite identify. Even I believed it, and I knew you better than most. Thomas remembered the planning, the careful execution. A John Doe in the morgue with similar features. A controlled explosion in an empty safe house. Official reports of Commander Lane's heroic final mission. The agency looked for you, Marla continued. For months. Some thought you might have been turned, gone rogue. But I knew better. You'd never betray what we stood for. She took a sip of her tea. You just found something that mattered more. Ellie is everything, Thomas said simply. After losing Sarah, I couldn't let my work put her in danger again. Being a father meant more than being a soldier. The morning light caught the silver in Marla's hair as she nodded. So, Thomas Lane became Thomas, the janitor. Working nights, so you could be there for her days. Living small, living quiet. Living honest, he corrected. There's nothing small about keeping floors clean or fixing broken pipes. It's honest work. It lets me sleep at night. And Ellie? Does she know who her father really was? Thomas shook his head. She knows her mother died in a car accident. She knows I used to be in the military. That's all she needs to know. Marla's expression softened. You were the best, Thomas. The way you moved last night, you haven't lost it. 5 years of pushing a broom hasn't dulled those instincts. That life is over, Marla. Is it? She pulled out another photo, this one recent. 3 men in security footage, entering the gala. Because they don't think so. The men from last night weren't random thugs. They're connected to Karakov's old network. Thomas felt his chest tighten. Karakov's in maximum security, but his organization isn't dead. It's evolved, grown. And now they know you're alive. They sat in heavy silence as a waitress refilled their cups. When she left, Marla spoke again, her voice gentle but firm. We need to go. I can have a safe house ready in an hour. New identities by nightfall. Thomas looked out the window toward Jefferson Middle School, where Ellie would be starting her day. His daughter's world was there. Her friends, her teachers, the life he'd built for her. We're not running. The men from last night were just the beginning, Marla warned as they stood to leave. The ones you brought down, they've come back. Thomas stared at the school building in the distance, where his daughter sat unaware in her morning class. The weight of his past pressed down on him like a physical thing, and he knew with crushing certainty that his carefully constructed peace was shattering around him. Thomas stood in the gleaming lobby of Marrow Industries, feeling exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights. His janitor's uniform had been like armor, letting him blend into the background. Now, in borrowed slacks and a button-down shirt, he felt every eye on him. The press conference was about to begin. Corporate communications staff bustled around, adjusting microphones and positioning cameras. Through the glass doors, he could see news vans parked outside, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky. There's our hero. Griffin Marrow's voice boomed across the lobby. He strode forward, expensive suit, perfectly tailored, white teeth flashing in a practiced smile. Thomas, so glad you could join us this morning. Thomas nodded politely, noting how Griffin's hand landed heavily on his shoulder, a gesture that looked friendly to observers but felt more like a claim of ownership. The press is very excited to meet you, Griffin continued, steering Thomas toward the makeshift stage. Everyone loves a story about an ordinary man doing extraordinary things. The lobby filled quickly with reporters and employees. Thomas recognized the cleaning staff hanging back near the service entrance, watching with a mixture of pride and uncertainty. Maria, who'd worked the night shift with him for 3 years, gave him a small wave. Griffin approached the podium, adjusting his silk tie. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. As you know, last week's charity gala took an unexpected turn. What could have been a tragedy was averted thanks to the quick thinking and remarkable courage of one of our own." Camera flashes burst like lightning. Thomas kept his face neutral, though his pulse quickened at the attention. "Thomas Lane has been a valued member of our maintenance staff for 4 years," Griffin continued. "But his actions revealed capabilities far beyond his current position. That's why I'm proud to announce that effective immediately, Thomas will be joining our executive security team." Applause filled the lobby. Griffin gestured for Thomas to join him at the podium. "Mr. Lane will help oversee the safety of our employees and facilities," Griffin announced, bringing his unique expertise to protect the Marrow Industries family. More cameras flashed. Thomas forced a smile, thinking of Ellie. She'd been so excited when he told her about the job offer, proud that others finally saw what she'd always known about her father. "Thank you, Mr. Marrow," Thomas said simply, keeping his remarks brief as planned. After the press conference, HR whisked Thomas away for paperwork and orientation. The security office was on the 20th floor, a far cry from the basement where he'd spent his nights mopping floors. Everything gleamed with corporate efficiency. Keycard readers, reinforced doors, surveillance monitors. The security director, Brad Phillips, led him through standard protocols. Thomas noticed things immediately: blind spots in the camera coverage, outdated emergency response procedures, guards who were more focused on their phones than their surroundings. "And this will be your office," Brad said, opening a door to a small but well-appointed room with a view of the city. "Quite a step up from the janitor's closet," came Griffin's voice from behind them. "Brad, give us a moment, would you?" The security director nodded and left, closing the door. Griffin's friendly demeanor shifted subtly, like a mask slipping. "Have a seat, Mr. Lane." Griffin settled into one of the leather chairs, gesturing to the other. "I trust everything meets your expectations?" "It's very generous," Thomas replied carefully. "Indeed it is." Griffin leaned forward, his voice dropping. "You know, I've made some calls about you. Interesting thing, before 4 years ago, Thomas Lane barely existed. A few scattered records, nothing solid." Thomas met his gaze steadily, but said nothing. "I don't particularly care who you were," Griffin continued. "What matters is who you are now, an asset. Your little display at the gala impressed a lot of important people. The press loves you. Our stock is up 3 points. He stood, straightening his cuffs. "But let's be clear, you're useful, Mr. Lane. But don't forget, everything has a price." Thomas watched Ellie push peas around her plate, making little green roads across the mashed potatoes. The kitchen of their modest apartment felt different tonight, warmer somehow, despite the weight of secrets pressing down on him. The old fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting a soft glow on their worn wooden table. "Dad?" Ellie looked up, her fork paused mid-journey. "How come you never told me you could do all that stuff? Like in the movies?" Thomas set down his own fork, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups keep things quiet to protect the people they love." Ellie scrunched her nose, unconvinced. "But you're not just a janitor, are you? You're like a superhero in disguise." A small laugh escaped him. "Not exactly a superhero." He watched as she hopped down from her chair and ran to get her backpack. She returned with her well-worn sketchbook and a handful of crayons scattered across the table. "I'm drawing you," she announced, her tongue poking out in concentration. "But this time, the real you." Thomas leaned back, his dinner forgotten as he watched her work. Her small hands moved with determination, switching between colors with careful consideration. The scratch of wax on paper filled their comfortable silence. After a few minutes, she held up her masterpiece. There he was, drawn in bold crayon strokes, wearing his janitor's uniform, but with a cape flowing behind him. Above the figure, in wobbly letters, she'd written, "My hero." Something caught in his throat. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. Tell me a story," she said, sliding onto his lap like she used to when she was smaller. "A real one, about before." Thomas wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Well," he began, There was this one time in a place called Morocco. He told her about the desert stars, so bright they looked like diamonds scattered across black velvet. He described the marketplace where he'd learned to love spiced tea, carefully editing out the dangerous parts of that particular mission. Instead, he focused on the kind family who'd sheltered him, the old woman who taught him to make flatbread, the children who'd played soccer in the dusty streets. Ellie's eyes grew wide. "Did you speak their language?" "A little Arabic," he admitted. "Want to learn how to say, 'thank you'?" They spent the next hour at the table, Ellie giggling as she tried to wrap her tongue around shukran. She drew more pictures, Thomas in different countries, always with that cape, always helping people. "Your mom loved to travel too," he said softly, showing her the small silver compass he kept in his pocket. "She's the one who taught me to always find my way home." Ellie traced the compass with a gentle finger. "I wish I remembered her better." "She'd be so proud of you," Thomas said, his voice thick. "You have her heart, always seeing the good in people." They washed dishes together, Ellie insisting on drying even though she had to stand on her tiptoes to reach the counter. She hummed a tune from school, occasionally asking questions about other places he'd been. Thomas felt something unlock in his chest as he shared carefully chosen stories, helping a lost child in Bangkok find their parents, rescuing a trapped mountain climber in Nepal, protecting endangered elephants in Kenya. With each tale, he watched Ellie's eyes light up, seeing him in a new way that somehow made him feel both proud and vulnerable. After homework and her bedtime routine, Ellie hugged him extra tight. "I'm glad you're not just a janitor," she whispered. "But I liked you, even when I thought you were." "That means everything to me," he said, kissing her forehead. "Sweet dreams, sweetheart." He stood in her doorway for a moment, watching her snuggle into her covers, surrounded by her artwork on the walls. The streetlight outside cast gentle shadows through her window, and he reminded himself that these quiet moments, was what he'd left his old life to protect. Thomas was washing up in the kitchen when he heard it, the soft whisper of paper sliding under their front door. His body tensed automatically, old instincts firing up. He moved silently across the apartment, checking first that Ellie's door was still closed. The envelope lay innocent and white against their welcome mat. No markings, no return address. He picked it up with careful fingers, feeling the single item inside. His heart began to pound even before he opened it. The photograph was crisp, professional quality. Ellie walking home from school that afternoon, her purple backpack bouncing, completely unaware she was being watched. The image was so clear, he could see the scuff on her left shoe, the sparkly butterfly clip in her hair. Thomas stared at the photo, his hands steady even as ice filled his veins. The message was clear, no words needed. They knew exactly where to hurt him. The morning sun painted long shadows through the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Church, casting pools of colored light across empty wooden pews. Thomas stood at the entrance, his hand resting on the heavy wooden door. The familiar scent of old wood and candle wax brought back memories of Sunday services with Sarah before everything changed. Pastor Raymond looked up from his Bible at the sound of footsteps echoing through the quiet sanctuary. His weathered face broke into a warm smile of recognition, though his eyes held a hint of concern. "Thomas Lane," he said softly, closing his Bible. "It's been a while, son." Thomas's throat tightened as he approached the front pew. His shoes squeaked against the polished floor, the sound somehow too loud in the sacred silence. 3 years, he managed. The pastor nodded, not rushing to fill the space between them with words. He simply waited, patient and present, as Thomas sank into the front pew. Sunlight streamed through the rose window above, warming Thomas's shoulders. "I saw the news," Pastor Raymond said finally, his voice gentle. "About what happened at the gala." Thomas ran a hand over his face, feeling the rough stubble beneath his fingers. "That's part of why I'm here." He looked up at the cross hanging above the altar, its simple lines a stark contrast to the ornate windows. "I've been hiding something. From everyone. Even Ellie." Pastor Raymond settled into the pew beside Thomas, close enough to show support but leaving enough space for comfort. "The truth has a way of finding daylight, doesn't it? I was someone else before. Thomas said, his words barely above a whisper. Someone who did important work, dangerous work. I thought if I disappeared, if I became small enough, invisible enough, it would keep Ellie safe. He turned to meet the pastor's steady gaze. But now they've found me, and everything I tried to prevent is happening anyway. The pastor nodded slowly, his hands folded in his lap. You know, Thomas, I've always wondered why you chose to be a janitor. A man with your capabilities could have done anything. It was honest work, Thomas replied. Simple, clean. No one looks too closely at the man with the mop. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. And now my daughter's in danger because of me, because of who I was. Who you are, Pastor Raymond corrected gently. The past doesn't stop being part of us just because we try to lock it away. Thomas stood suddenly, pacing before the altar. The colored light from the windows followed his movement, painting his shadow in shifting hues. How do you protect someone when you're the reason they're in danger? The pastor was quiet for a long moment, watching Thomas move. You know, when Sarah was sick, she used to sit right where you're standing now. She'd ask God why her daughter had to face such pain, losing a mother so young. Thomas stopped pacing, his chest tight at the mention of his wife's name. Do you know what she concluded? Pastor Raymond continued. That sometimes the greatest act of protection isn't hiding from the storm. It's teaching our children how to be strong within it. But Ellie's just a little girl, Thomas protested. Who's already stronger than you know, the pastor said, rising to stand beside him. She's her mother's daughter, and yours. Perhaps what she needs isn't a father who disappears to protect her, but one who shows her how to face life's challenges with courage and truth. Thomas's eyes burned as he looked at the cross again. I've been away from here too long. God doesn't measure absence in years, Thomas. He measures presence in moments, like this one. The morning light had shifted, warming the wooden pews around them. Thomas felt something inside him shift too, a weight he'd carried for so long beginning to lift. The truth is, Pastor Raymond said, placing a gentle hand on Thomas's shoulder, you can't always prevent pain, but you can prepare those you love to face it, with faith, with courage, and most importantly, together. Thomas nodded slowly, feeling clarity settle over him like the sunlight streaming through the windows. He wouldn't run anymore, couldn't run anymore. The time for hiding was over. He pulled out his phone, finding Marla's number. His thumb hovered over it for a moment before he pressed call. When her voice came through, clear and professional, Thomas spoke with newfound resolution. Help me finish what I started. The community center buzzed with weekend activity. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the gymnasium where kids played basketball and parents chatted on metal bleachers. Thomas sat with his back against the wall, watching Ellie practice her free throws with the other children. He noticed the slight irregularities first. A door that should have been locked was cracked open. A maintenance worker he didn't recognize. Small things that most people would miss, but his training wouldn't let him ignore. Thomas straightened, scanning the room more carefully now. "Daddy, watch this," Ellie called out, dribbling the ball with growing confidence. He smiled and nodded, but his attention was split between his daughter and the growing unease in his gut. The first sign of trouble came when the fire alarm blared. Instead of the usual chaos of an evacuation, Thomas noticed how the maintenance worker moved to block the main exit. 2 more men appeared at the side doors, their jackets bulging suspiciously. "Everyone stay calm," one of the men announced, reaching into his jacket. "This is just a temporary—" Thomas was already moving. "Kids, behind the bleachers! Parents, form a line!" His voice carried the unmistakable tone of command, cutting through the rising panic. The first attacker barely had time to draw his weapon before Thomas reached him. Years of training took over as Thomas grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it at precisely the right angle. The gun clattered to the floor as Thomas used the man's own momentum to throw him off balance. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Thomas called to one of the regular volunteers, "get the children to the storage room. Lock the door." Parents who moments ago had been checking their phones now formed a human shield, guiding the kids to safety. Thomas caught glimpses of Ellie helping the younger children, her face showing more determination than fear. The second attacker came at him with a knife. Thomas blocked the strike, his movements fluid and precise. He could hear gasps from the onlookers as he disarmed the man with what looked like minimal effort, though his muscles burned with the strain. "Someone call 911!" a parent shouted, already filming with their phone. The third man tried to flee, but found his path blocked by two fathers who had played college football. They tackled him just as police sirens began wailing in the distance. Within minutes, it was over. The attackers were subdued, the children were safe, and Thomas stood in the center of the gym, breathing heavily but composed. Cell phone videos had already captured everything. Ellie broke away from the group and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "That was amazing, Dad!" Parents surrounded them, offering thanks and handshakes. Someone had already called the local news station. As police secured the scene, reporters began arriving, their cameras focusing on the unassuming man in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt who had just saved dozens of lives. "Mr. Lane," a reporter pushed forward. "How did you know what to do?" Thomas held Ellie close, considering his answer. Before he could speak, an elderly man in a Vietnam veteran's cap made his way through the crowd. He walked with a slight limp, but carried himself with military bearing. "I know that training when I see it," the veteran said, extending his hand to Thomas. "Special ops?" Thomas nodded slightly, accepting the handshake. "Something like that." The veteran's grip was firm, his eyes clear and knowing. "You reminded me what we stand for, son. Not the fancy uniforms or the medals, but protecting people who need it. Being there when it counts." More people pressed forward, offering words of support and gratitude. A mother hugged him, tears in her eyes. "My daughter was in here," she whispered. Thomas saw phones lighting up with social media notifications. His story was spreading. The hero janitor was trending locally, with videos of his intervention being shared rapidly. Someone had brought him a bottle of water. Another person offered their jacket when they noticed him shivering slightly from the adrenaline crash. The community he had tried so hard to blend into was now embracing him fully. A small hand tugged at his shirt. Thomas looked down to find Ellie smiling up at him, her eyes bright with pride. She hugged him tightly, standing on tiptoes to whisper in his ear, "You don't need to hide anymore." Thomas held his daughter close, feeling the weight of her words. Around them, the community center filled with police taking statements, parents hugging their children, and reporters trying to piece together what had happened. But in that moment, all he felt was the simple truth in his daughter's embrace and the realization that she was right. The elderly veteran patted his shoulder one more time before walking away. "Welcome home, soldier," he said quietly. "Welcome home." Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows of the Modest Lane apartment. The warm aroma of butter and maple syrup filled the air as Thomas stood at the stove, carefully flipping a perfectly golden pancake. Behind him, Ellie sat at their small kitchen table, humming while she worked intently on something he couldn't see. "No peeking, Dad," she warned, hunching protectively over her project. Thomas smiled, keeping his eyes on the griddle. "I wouldn't dream of it." He added the finished pancake to the growing stack beside him. "But whatever you're doing back there sure is making you quiet. Usually, you're telling me about every single thing that happened at school yesterday." "This is more important than school stuff," Ellie declared, the sound of crayons scratching against paper punctuating her words. Thomas poured more batter onto the hot surface, watching it spread into a perfect circle. These quiet moments with his daughter were everything to him. After the incident at the community center last week, he'd been worried she might be scared or confused. Instead, she'd seemed proud, more attached to him than ever. "Okay, done," Ellie announced triumphantly. "Close your eyes." Thomas turned off the stove and did as instructed. He heard the scrape of her chair, followed by light footsteps approaching. "Hold out your hands," she directed. He felt something flat and slightly rough being placed in his palms. "Now open." Thomas opened his eyes to find a handmade card decorated with bright crayon drawings. On the front was a figure wearing what appeared to be his janitor's uniform, but with a red cape flowing behind it. The words, "World's Best Dad," arched over the top in careful block letters. "It's a Father's Day card," Ellie explained, bouncing on her toes. "I know it's not for 2 more weeks, but I wanted to give it to you now, just in case I forget." she added with a mischievous grin. Thomas's throat tightened as he opened the card. Inside, Ellie had written, "Dear Dad, you're my hero, even when you're just making pancakes. Love, Ellie." "Come here, sweetheart," Thomas said softly, pulling her into a tight hug. She giggled against his chest as he kissed the top of her head. "This is the best card I've ever gotten." "Better than the ones from the president?" she teased, referencing one of the stories he'd recently shared about his past. "Way better," Thomas assured her. "Now how about we eat these pancakes before they get cold?" They sat together, sharing breakfast and easy conversation. Ellie covered her pancakes in syrup and told him about the book she was reading for class. Thomas savored every moment, storing away the sound of her laughter, the way the morning light caught her hair. "Can we have pizza for dinner?" Ellie asked as she finished her last bite. "Sure thing, Princess. I'll pick some up on my way home from work." "The usual?" "Extra cheese," she confirmed, carrying her plate to the sink. "And don't forget—" "No olives," they said in unison, making her laugh again. Thomas helped her gather her backpack and lunch, then walked her to the bus stop like he did every morning. She hugged him goodbye, then bounded up the bus steps, turning to wave before finding her seat. The rest of Thomas's morning passed normally. He did some laundry, paid bills, and headed to work for his afternoon shift. Around 3 o'clock, his phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Prayson, Martinez next door, who usually kept an eye out for Ellie after school. "Is Ellie home sick today?" Thomas's blood ran cold. His fingers trembled as he typed back, "No, she took the bus this morning." "Why?" "She didn't come home on the bus. I thought maybe you'd picked her up." Thomas was already moving, calling the school as he ran to his car. The secretary confirmed Ellie had been in class all day but had left with the other bus riders. His training kicked in, pushing down the panic trying to claw its way up his throat. He drove the bus route, scanning the sidewalks. Nothing. He called Marla, who promised to start making calls. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. "Lane?" he answered, his voice steady despite his racing heart. A digitally altered voice responded, "Check the dumpster behind the Walgreens on 4th Street. Come alone. One chance. No police." The line went dead. Thomas's hands were steady as he drove to the location, though his chest felt like it was being crushed in a vice. The dumpster was in a secluded corner of the parking lot. As he approached, he caught the acrid smell of something recently burned. There, partially hidden under some cardboard, was Ellie's purple backpack. The edges were blackened and still warm, the fabric melted in places. Her house key, attached to a small unicorn keychain he'd given her for Christmas, dangled from one strap. His phone rang again. Same unknown number. The altered voice spoke before he could. "Now you understand. One chance, Commander. Come alone." Thomas's hands trembled as he dialed Marla's number. The phone felt heavy, like it carried the weight of his decision. 3 rings. Then her familiar voice answered, sharp and alert despite the late hour. "They took her," Thomas said, his voice hollow. "They have my little girl. I'm mobilizing a team right now," Marla responded immediately. "Where's the meet?" "No." Thomas closed his eyes, steadying himself. "I'm going alone. That's non-negotiable." "Thomas, you know that's exactly what they want." "I know." He paced his living room, past Ellie's backpack still smoking faintly on the kitchen table. Her Father's Day card lay next to it, its edges singed, but the crayon hearts still visible. "But I won't risk her life. Not after—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Not after losing her mother." Silence filled the line. Then Marla spoke, her voice softer. "At least let me help somehow." Thomas sat at his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm sending you something. It's everything I've gathered on Griffin's overseas accounts, shipping manifests that don't add up, meetings that never officially happened. If anything goes wrong—" He paused. "Make sure it gets to the right people." "Thomas, I need to know someone has my back, Marla, even if you can't be there." He heard her slow exhale. "Okay, but promise me one thing. Remember who you are, not just who you were." Thomas touched the small cross, hanging from his neck, Ellie's Christmas gift. "I haven't forgotten." After ending the call, Thomas moved with practiced efficiency. He changed into dark clothes, comfortable shoes. No weapons, they'd specified that. but his mind was already cataloging everything around him that could become one if needed. The drive to the shipyard took 23 minutes. Each second felt like torture, his imagination conjuring worse and worse scenarios. But he forced himself to focus, to remember his training. Stay calm, think clearly, watch everything. The shipyard loomed ahead, a maze of rusted containers and forgotten machinery. The security gate hung open, chain cut. Thomas parked, where instructed in clear view of the main warehouse. The lot was empty except for one other vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows. The air smelled of salt and metal as he stepped out. Overhead, clouds covered the moon, leaving only dim security lights to cast long shadows between the containers. His footsteps echoed on the concrete. A door creaked somewhere ahead. Thomas followed the sound, moving quietly despite the open space. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every corner could reveal his daughter or her captors. The warehouse door stood ajar, light spilling out in a thin line. Thomas approached slowly, hands raised to show he was unarmed. "I'm here," he called out. "Alone, like you asked. Enter slowly." The voice was accented, familiar in a way that made Thomas's stomach clench. He pushed the door open. The warehouse interior was mostly empty, its high ceiling lost in darkness. A single industrial light illuminated the center of the space. And there was Ellie. She sat in a metal chair, hands bound behind her back. Her school uniform was dirty but intact, no visible injuries. Her eyes found his immediately, wide with fear but also relief. "Daddy, it's okay, sweetheart," Thomas said softly. "I'm here now." Movement in the shadows. A figure stepped into the light, and Thomas felt ice spread through his veins. The man was older now, hair grayed at the temples, but Thomas would never forget that face. Those cold eyes. Jarek Volkov. The name tasted bitter on his tongue. The arms dealer smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Commander Lane. Or is it just janitor now?" He circled Ellie's chair slowly. "You know, when I heard you were alive, I almost didn't believe it. The great Thomas Lane, scrubbing toilets." He clicked his tongue. "Such a waste of talent." "Let her go," Thomas said. "She has nothing to do with this. On the contrary." Jarek rested a hand on Ellie's shoulder. Thomas fought the urge to lunge forward. "She has everything to do with this. You see, you taught me something important that day. You let me live. Mercy." His fingers tightened slightly. "Mercy is weakness." "I made a choice," Thomas said carefully, "because there had been enough killing." "You made a mistake," Jarek corrected. "And now you get to learn what that costs." He looked down at Ellie, whose chin was raised defiantly despite her fear. "She's brave, your daughter. Takes after you, I think. Shame she'll have to watch what happens next." Thomas kept his voice steady, though his heart hammered. "Whatever you want from me, fine, but let her go first." "What I want," Jarek's laugh echoed in the empty space. "I want you to understand something, Commander. I want you to feel what it's like to lose everything, just like I did when you destroyed my organization." He stepped away from Ellie, into the full light. "And then, when you understand completely, maybe I'll show the same mercy you showed me." The words hung in the air between them. Thomas looked at his daughter, saw the trust in her eyes despite her fear. She believed in him completely. To her, he wasn't just a janitor or a former commander. He was her father, her hero. And that made him more dangerous than any weapon. "You're right about one thing," Thomas said quietly. "I did make a mistake that day." He met Jarek's gaze steadily. "I should have made sure you stayed down." The warehouse air hung thick with rust and shadows. Metal chains bit into Thomas's wrists as he knelt on the cold concrete floor. His left eye was swelling from the beating he'd taken when he first arrived, but his gaze never left Ellie. She sat tied to a chair 20 feet away, her pink backpack still on her shoulders, tears streaming silently down her face. "Your daughter is quite artistic," Jarek said, his accent sharp as he circled Thomas. He held up one of Ellie's drawings, the one where she'd drawn Thomas as a superhero. "Such imagination. She sees you as something more than the pathetic janitor you pretend to be." Thomas remained silent, his breathing steady despite the pain. Jarek crumpled the drawing and tossed it aside. You know who made all this possible? Jarek gestured to the armed men positioned around the warehouse. Your ambitious CEO, Griffin Marrow. He needed certain items moved quietly across borders. We needed funding to rebuild what you destroyed. He laughed, a cold sound that echoed off the metal walls. He was most interested when we mentioned your name. 2 more guards dragged in a struggling figure. Griffin himself, his expensive suit torn, his face bruised. Your employer tried to run when things got messy, Jarek sneered. No loyalty among thieves, yes? Griffin spat blood onto the floor. This wasn't the arrangement, he snarled. You said no children would be involved. Plans change, Jarek replied dismissively. He turned back to Thomas. You could have been part of something greater. Instead, you chose to play house, to mop floors, and hide behind this facade of, what? Redemption? Thomas closed his eyes briefly, his lips moving in silent prayer. The small cross necklace Ellie had given him last Christmas pressed against his chest under his shirt, a reminder of what truly mattered. Nothing to say, Commander? Jarek grabbed Thomas's hair, yanking his head back. Where is that legendary calm now? The man who could talk down any situation? Let her go, Thomas said quietly. She's innocent. Innocent? Jarek released him with a shove. Like my brother was innocent? The one who died in that raid you led? Your brother was trafficking children, Thomas's voice carried across the warehouse, steady and clear. You know that's why I came for your organization, that's why I hunted you all down, Ellie whimpered, and Thomas's heart clenched. He needed to keep Jarek talking, keep him focused on the past. But you let me live, Jarek spat. Your mercy was an insult. And now, he pulled out a pistol, checking the magazine with practiced ease. Now I return the favor. You'll watch everything you love burn, just as I did. Griffin struggled against his captors. This is insane. I have money. More than what I've already paid. Name your price. Money? Jarek laughed again. This was never about money. This is about justice. About finishing what should have ended years ago. Thomas felt the familiar calm settling over him, the stillness before action that had saved his life countless times before. He tested the chains quietly, feeling for weak links while keeping his eyes on Ellie. You pray now? Jarek noticed Thomas's lips moving. God abandoned this place long ago, my friend. He's here, Thomas said softly. He's always been here, even when I forgot that. Such faith, Jarek mocked. Will it protect your daughter? Will it? The first gunshot cracked through the warehouse like thunder, followed immediately by the sound of breaking glass. One of Jarek's men dropped, a sniper's bullet finding its mark through the high windows. Chaos erupted. More shots rang out as Marla's team breached the building from multiple points. Smoke grenades hissed, filling the space with tactical cover. Thomas didn't hesitate. He'd been working the chains loose for minutes, and now they fell away as he surged to his feet. Jarek shouted orders in Russian, his men returning fire at the shadows. Griffin's guards released him to join the fight, and the CEO scrambled for cover behind some crates. Thomas moved through the smoke like a ghost, muscle memory from years of training taking over. He dodged bullets, rolled under gunfire, every motion bringing him closer to Ellie. An armed man appeared in his path. Thomas disarmed him with one fluid movement, using the man's own momentum to throw him into a wall. "Daddy!" Ellie cried out as he reached her. Thomas's hands were steady as he untied her bonds, his body shielding her from the firefight. "Close your eyes, sweetheart," he whispered, gathering her into his arms. "Hold on tight. Don't let go." She buried her face in his shoulder, arms wrapped around his neck. Thomas could feel her heart racing against his chest as he moved through the warehouse, staying low, using the smoke for cover. Bullets pinged off metal supports around them. Through the chaos, he heard Marla's voice calling out tactical commands to her team. A figure loomed through the smoke. "Jarek," gun raised. "You don't leave here alive," he snarled, firing. Thomas spun, taking the bullet in his shoulder instead of his back, where it would have hit Ellie. The pain was immediate and burning. But he didn't slow down. He kept moving, kept protecting, every step carrying his daughter closer to safety. More gunfire erupted behind him, but now it was Marla's team laying down, covering fire, giving him the precious seconds he needed. Thomas burst through a side door into the cool night air, still carrying Ellie, still running, until they reached the protective line of tactical vehicles and armed agents waiting outside. Only then did he allow himself to sink to his knees, still holding Ellie close, still shielding her with his body, as the firefight continued inside the warehouse. His shoulder blazed with pain, but none of that mattered. His daughter was safe. She was alive. Everything else was secondary. "I've got you," he whispered into her hair as she cried. "I've got you, baby girl. You're safe now. You're safe." Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marrow Industries' executive floor. The polished marble floors reflected the warm glow, a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere inside. Thomas pushed his cleaning cart past the reception desk, his navy blue uniform crisp and clean. The security guard, who once barely acknowledged him, now stood straighter and offered a respectful nod. Through the glass walls, Thomas could see Griffin Marrow holding court in the boardroom. The CEO gestured dramatically, his expensive suit catching the light as he addressed his board of directors. They sat around the massive oak table, their faces a mix of concern and confusion. Marla Jennings chose that moment to make her entrance. She strode through the boardroom doors, flanked by 2 FBI agents in dark suits. Her heels clicked purposefully against the floor, and she carried a thick folder under her arm. The conversation inside died immediately. "Mr. Marrow," Marla's voice was cool and professional, "I believe we need to discuss your overseas investment portfolio." Griffin's practiced smile faltered for just a moment. "I wasn't aware we had a meeting scheduled. My board and I are in the middle of—" "This can't wait." Marla opened her folder and began laying out documents on the table. "These are wire transfers from your personal accounts to shell companies in Eastern Europe, companies that coincidentally share addresses with known arms dealers." The board members began to murmur, shifting uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Griffin's face reddened. "Those are legitimate business transactions. Your lawyers will be very interested in these." Marla produced more papers. "Especially the ones showing your direct correspondence with Jarek Volkov regarding the Gala attack. An attack you helped orchestrate to cover up the evidence of your weapons trading." Thomas continued mopping, moving slowly past the boardroom. He could see Griffin's reflection in the window, the man's composed facade cracking like thin ice. "This is absurd," Griffin sputtered, looking to his board members for support. But they were all staring at the evidence before them, their expressions hardening. One of the FBI agents stepped forward, pulling out handcuffs. "Griffin Marrow, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit terrorism, money laundering, and international weapons trafficking." The boardroom erupted in chaos. Chairs scraped against the floor as board members stood. Phones came out, frantically documenting the moment their CEO's empire crumbled. Griffin's face had gone from red to ash white. As the agents led Griffin toward the door, he locked eyes with Thomas, the janitor who had disrupted his perfect world, the man he'd mocked in front of hundreds. Thomas didn't smile or gloat. He simply kept mopping, his movements steady and dignified. "You," Griffin spat. "You planned this." Thomas looked up from his work, his voice quiet but firm. "No, Mr. Marrow, you did. Every choice you made led to this moment." The agents escorted Griffin past Thomas's cleaning cart. The CEO's Italian leather shoes squeaked against the freshly mopped floor, leaving scuff marks in their wake. Thomas watched him go, then dipped his mop back into the bucket. There was still work to be done. Later that afternoon, the press gathered in front of Marrow Industries. Camera flashes lit up the steps as reporters jostled for position. Thomas stood at the podium, still in his janitor's uniform, with Ellie holding his hand beside him. Marla stood off to the side, a small smile playing at her lips. A military representative in full-dress uniform approached Thomas, holding out official papers. "Commander Lane, in light of your exemplary service and recent actions, we'd like to offer you full reinstatement. Your country needs men like you." The crowd fell silent, waiting for his response. Thomas looked down at Ellie, who squeezed his hand. He thought about the past few weeks, the violence, the fear, the constant looking over his shoulder. Then he thought about quiet evenings, helping Ellie with homework, making pancakes on Sunday mornings, and the simple satisfaction of honest work. He gently pushed the papers back. "Thank you, but I have to decline." The military man frowned. "May I ask why?" Thomas stepped closer to the microphone, his voice clear and strong. "I only ever wanted to serve one mission, my daughter, and people like you." He gestured to the crowd. "The ones who go to work every day, who take care of their families, who build communities. That's the most important service I can think of." The crowd erupted in cheers. Ellie beamed up at him, pride shining in her eyes. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but Thomas kept his attention on what mattered most, his daughter's hand in his, and the knowledge that finally, truly, they were safe. Marla caught his eye from the side of the stage and gave him a knowing nod. She understood better than anyone what he was choosing, and why. Some battles were fought in shadows and secret places, but the most important ones happened in the light of day, in the small moments between a father and daughter. The autumn breeze carried the sound of construction equipment across the empty lot on Cedar Street. Yellow excavators moved earth, while workers in hard hats consulted blueprints spread across a folding table. Above them, a simple banner fluttered. "Future home of the Lane Community Center for Veterans and Families." Thomas stood at the edge of the construction site, his hands in the pockets of his worn jacket. He watched as the foundation began taking shape, barely noticing the dried mud caking his work boots. Behind him, Ellie sat cross-legged on a bench, sketching the scene in her notebook with careful strokes. "Look, Dad." She held up her drawing. "I put in the playground we talked about, right where you said it would go." Thomas smiled, walking over to examine her artwork. The sketch showed not just the building plans, but families gathered outside, stick figures of all sizes, some in military uniforms, others holding hands with their children. In the corner, she'd drawn a small figure in a janitor's uniform, with a cape flowing behind him. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," he said, touching the corner of the paper gently. Mrs. Martinez from the Neighborhood Association approached, clipboard in hand. "Thomas, you won't believe the response we're getting. More donations came in this morning. People read your story in the paper, and just half they want to help." Thomas nodded, still amazed by how things had changed. 3 weeks ago, he'd been cleaning floors in silence. Now, his story had touched something in people's hearts. Anonymous donors had stepped forward, one after another. Some were wealthy business leaders who'd been at the gala that night. Others were ordinary folks, sending whatever they could spare. "The contractor says we're ahead of schedule," Mrs. Martinez continued. "And veterans from 3 counties have already signed up to volunteer once we're open." A truck pulled up, carrying lumber for the framework. Thomas recognized the driver, Jim, a former Marine who'd reached out after reading about Thomas in the local paper. Jim hopped down from the cab, giving Thomas a respectful nod. "Brought some extra hands today, Commander," Jim called out, as 4 more veterans emerged from their cars. They were all wearing work gloves and carrying tools. "Just Thomas," he corrected gently. "And thank you for coming." The men got to work, falling into an easy rhythm. Thomas joined them, helping to unload supplies. His muscles remembered this kind of labor from his years of maintenance work, but there was something different about it now. Every board they carried, every nail they drove, was building something more than just walls. Ellie moved between the workers, offering water bottles from a cooler and showing her drawings to anyone who'd look. The construction crew had adopted her as their unofficial mascot, and they'd even given her a small hard hat decorated with butterfly stickers. As the morning wore on, more people from the neighborhood stopped by. A local coffee shop sent over hot drinks. A grandmother who lived nearby arrived with homemade sandwiches. Children pressed their faces against the chain-link fence, watching the building take shape. "Mr. Lane?" A teenage boy approached tentatively. "My dad. He's deployed right now. But when he comes home, could we maybe come here? Together?" Thomas put down the lumber he was carrying and faced the boy directly. "That's exactly why we're building this place. For fathers and kids to have somewhere to reconnect, to figure things out together." The boy smiled, relief visible on his face. "Cool. Maybe. Maybe I could volunteer too? Help other kids?" "We'd like that," Thomas said, reaching out to shake the boy's hand. The day continued, full of small moments like these. People sharing stories, offering help, finding hope in what was growing from this empty lot. Thomas moved through it all quietly, still more comfortable with action than words. By late afternoon, the basic framework was taking shape. Thomas stood back, Ellie's hand in his, looking at what they'd accomplished. The setting sun cast long shadows through the wooden beams, creating patterns on the ground that looked almost like his daughter's drawings. "Dad," Ellie squeezed his hand, "are you still going to wear your old suit for the ribbon cutting?" "Yes," he said simply, "it's the right thing to do." 6 days later, a crowd gathered in front of the partially completed center. Folding chairs filled what would eventually be the parking lot. American flags hung from the framework, and a red ribbon stretched across the entrance. Thomas stood at the small podium, wearing the same threadbare suit from the gala. It was still too tight at the shoulders, still showed signs of wear at the cuffs. But now, somehow, it felt different. Ellie stood beside him, wearing her best dress and holding his hand. The mayor was there, along with local business leaders who'd once ignored him in hallways. Marla sat in the back row, out of uniform but alert as ever. Jim and his crew of veterans stood together, work gloves tucked in their back pockets. The teenage boy was there too, sitting with his mother, both of them smiling. Thomas looked down at his prepared speech, then folded it and put it away. He looked out at the faces before him, the wealthy and the working class, veterans and civilians, all together on rickety folding chairs. "This building," he began, his quiet voice carrying in the morning stillness, "started with a suit. This one, actually." He tugged at his jacket with a small smile. "It wasn't much of a suit then, and it isn't much now. But I've learned something important. This isn't about suits or medals." He paused, looking down at Ellie, who beamed up at him. "This is about showing up," he continued. "For our children, for each other, for ourselves." Thomas reached for the scissors, and with Ellie's hands alongside his, they cut the ribbon together. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of First Presbyterian, casting warm colors across the wooden pews. Thomas Lane sat next to his daughter Ellie, their shoulders touching as they shared a hymnal. His voice, usually quiet and reserved, joined the congregation in singing "Amazing Grace." The past few weeks had changed everything. Yet here, in this peaceful sanctuary, Thomas found a different kind of strength than the one he'd needed during the crisis. Ellie's small hand slipped into his as they sang, and he gave it a gentle squeeze. Pastor Mike's sermon touched on redemption and second chances. From his seat in the middle pews, not hiding in the back anymore, Thomas noticed several heads turn his way during certain passages. But these looks weren't filled with judgment like before. They held respect, understanding, and something that made him even more humble: gratitude. When the service ended, Thomas and Ellie made their way toward the exit. Usually, this was the part where people would hurry past, avoiding the janitor in his threadbare suit. But today was different. "Mr. Lane," Mrs. Henderson, who ran the local bakery, touched his arm. "I made extra chocolate chip muffins this morning. Would you and Ellie like to take some home?" Before Thomas could answer, Mr. Peterson, the retired mailman, stepped up. "Thomas, I've been meaning to ask, would you consider speaking at our veterans group next month? The guys would love to hear from you." "I'd be honored," Thomas replied softly, still not entirely comfortable with the attention, but grateful for the kindness. A small crowd gathered around them in the church foyer. Sarah Matthews, whose daughter was in Ellie's class, smiled warmly. "We're all so blessed to have you in our community, Thomas." "What you did?" "Well, it opened our eyes to not judging books by their covers." Ellie beamed up at her father, pride shining in her eyes. She had always seen what others missed, the hero beneath the humble exterior. As they made their way down the church steps, Thomas was stopped again and again. The same people who once averted their eyes now wanted to shake his hand. Parents introduced their children, who looked at him with awe. Even teenagers, usually absorbed in their phones, paused to say hello. "Daddy," Ellie whispered as they finally reached their car. "Everyone loves you now." Thomas helped her into the passenger seat, taking a moment to straighten her Sunday dress. "They're just being kind, sweetheart." "No," she insisted, with the wisdom that sometimes made her seem older than her 10 years. "They finally see you like I do." The drive home was peaceful, with Ellie humming hymns from the service. Their small house looked different now, too. No longer a place to hide, but a home where they could truly live. Inside, Ellie rushed to her room and came back with a drawing she'd been working on all week. Thomas watched as she carefully removed the backing from a simple frame they'd bought at the dollar store. The drawing showed Thomas in his familiar thrift store suit, but she'd added something special. Not a cape or mask, but a gentle glow around him, like the light from the church's stained glass windows. Above the figure, in her careful handwriting, were the words, "My dad is a hero, even in a cheap suit." Thomas's throat tightened as she hung it on the living room wall, right next to her school awards and family photos. The simple artwork captured something he'd taken years to understand: that true strength had nothing to do with appearances or titles. Standing there in his Sunday suit, the same one that had once drawn smirks at the charity gala, Thomas closed his eyes in a quiet prayer of thanks, for his daughter's safety, for second chances, for a community that had learned to see with their hearts instead of their eyes. When he opened them, Ellie was watching him with that gentle smile that reminded him so much of her mother. "Turns out," Thomas said, glancing at his daughter, "it was never the suit that made the man. It was who he wore it for. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending." If you enjoyed the story of Thomas Lane, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.